I would like to introduce myself. My name is Samuel Hawthorne, and I'd like to give you a little background on how I became a member of the 1870 survey crew in an area then known as the Cherokee Outlet. My background is my family came to America from Great Britain in 1812. They settled in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, later to move on to Ohio when land there became scarce and the beginning rumblings of something called a gold rush in California. Paul made the decision with some, arm twisting of Ma that we load up the wagon train and move to California. The trip took 3 months, but we made it to Sacramento before the snows closed the mountain passes. Paul opened another blacksmith shop there in Sacramento, and by that time my closest brother Henry was born, and I came along a year later, March 8th, 1850, and Henry and I helped Paul keep his blacksmith shop open, helping the miners in the area and the prospectors while Ma was knitting and making clothes, repairing clothes for the prospectors in the area. And my other sisters, Margaret and Elisha, was helping her raise chickens and selling eggs to make ends meet. But as a young man, I got an itch in the saddle, as they say, and I thought I could head out on my own. So by the time I was 17, I had saved up a little money, and I one day just stood up to Paul and said, "I'm headed to Colorado." He wasn't too happy about it, but I found a horse that I could buy, loaded up my saddlebags and moved to Colorado, found a blacksmith shop in Denver, Colorado, worked for the owner there for 2 years, saved up some more money, and by that time there was some posters going around saying that they were needing members of a survey crew in some place called the Cherokee Outlet, past No Man's Land, which was east of Colorado, and I thought, that's just the place I need to be. So the next morning I saddled up my horse and headed out, and I was told to head toward Fort Arbuckle. Well, by the time I got there, it was late spring, early summer of 1872, and I got down to the area where the old stockade was at, and to find out from the people in the area, the government had closed Fort Arbuckle and moved everybody up to Fort Reno. So I thought, well, I've already seen part of that territory coming from Colorado, so I slept out under the trees that night, loaded up the horse the next morning, went up to Fort Reno, found out the person I needed to talk to, who was the head compass man of a survey crew, and talked to him for a while, and he found out that I had blacksmith experience and also some mining skills from working with the miners in California and Colorado. So he said I could get hired on as an assistant chain man. And if you don't know what a chain man is, I'd like to show you a sample of it. This is a chain, and each one of these links is approximately 8 inches long. And in this chain are 100 links that equal 16.5 feet. And at the time I was going, that looks like a simple job. All we have to do is just carry a chain around. Well, little did I know that we would have to be walking throughout this territory to be surveyed. But each one of these chains is 100 links long, 16.5 feet. 4 chains equal a rod. 80 chains equal 1 mile. Well, let me tell you, dragging this chain over townships and ranges was not always the easiest job to do, but that's what we were paid to do. And thinking back on it, we enjoyed it. We got to see a lot of territory, meet a lot of interesting characters, from Indians to just people traveling through the area that you kind of wondered what their background was. But in our crew was 6 men primarily. We had a head compass man, an assistant compass man, a chain man, me as the assistant chain man, an axe man, and a quarter man. Well, to be out in the country for a number of weeks, we also had to have the ability to carry all of our supplies. Well, as you heard, we had 6 men. We didn't have the covered wagons like they used to go from when my pa and ma moved from Ohio to California. We carried everything with us, which is either in our rucksacks or on our saddlebags with our horses. But to give you some idea of what we had to get as supplies, and we also were able to acquire several good cooking skills while we were out in the country. But if you don't mind me reading here a little bit, some notes that I took while we were out on the survey crew. There were no roads except Indian trails, cow trails, no houses except areas where maybe the Indians had been camped out as they followed the buffalo herds. There were no inhabitants except small bands of marauders. Our home was where night overtook us, and before starting, the surveyor must provide some food and shelter for himself and his men, and the implements to work with. And for our party of 6, here's a sample of the supplies that we purchased for 4 months. 8 barrels of flour, 3 barrels of salt pork, 3 to 4 bushels of clear white beans, 2 bushels of dried apples, 150 pounds of dry sugar, 60 pounds of ground coffee, 10 pounds of tea, 10 pounds of saleratus, which was, I think, an ingredient maybe, because we always put it when we were baking. An equivalent amount of soda and cream of tartar, 1 pound of good pepper, 1 small bag of salt, 25 pounds of rice, 25 pounds of oatmeal, 5 pounds of Castile soap, and other articles that could be afforded and thinks best for us. But that was just the food. We still needed camp furniture. So we found a mercantile store. We bought 1 large soldier's tent for our party, 1 small tent for our packer, blankets, axes, matches, tin pails, basins, plates, knives and forks, spoons, frying pans, a tin can for the lard and saleratus, a tin pepper box, soldier-style drinking cups, and all of this depended on the very nature of the country that we were to survey and the facilities for moving those materials. But when we got to packing, 1 or 2 horses or mules, bells and parcels for the horses, pack saddles, a quantity of good bags, large and small for packing about camp and for provisions, our instruments, which included compasses, our chain, tally pins, a tape line, marking tools, pocket compasses, hatchets, whetstone files, pens, ink, paper, field books. As you can see, we had to keep a very large amount of notes while we were out in the country during our survey. But our contract that our bosses signed dated to September 17th, 1872, and it was signed by Theodore Barrett and Orville Smith. And the contract specified that they were to survey from the North Canadian River to what was the Kansas border, from the 98th meridian to the 100th meridian, which we found out later the 100th meridian was the eastern boundary, as I referred to before, no man's land. We didn't ever get to no man's land. We didn't really want to find out what was going on out there. We had enough to do in the Cherokee Outlet. But for the survey crew, we had to learn what a township, was first, and that is an area made up of 36 square miles in 1 square mile increments, 6 miles wide and 6 miles north to south. But prior to us surveying in the Cherokee Outlet, Mr. Barrett had also signed a contract with E.N. Darling earlier in the late 1860s to set up what is known as the initial point. And it is an area about 4 miles east of Fort Arbuckle in the Chickasaw, in about the center of the Chickasaw Nation, as a starting point with a stone marker, because you had to have a starting point to begin to know how to lay out the land. And our survey was done by the survey land system that was established in 1795, proposed by Thomas Jefferson, to lay out farming and ranching properties to know the size of the land and the properties of that land. There were later revisions done in 1851 and 1862 that further defined our responsibilities to the contract that our bosses signed in 1872. So as we progressed from the initial point, we were to survey townships 21, 22, 23, 24 north of the initial point and the baseline, which was a east-west line through the initial point in the southern Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory. So we were north, and then we were to do ranges 5, 6, 7, and 8 west of the Indian Meridian, which was the north-south line going through the initial point. So we knew the exact starting point. And all survey crews start out in the southeast corner of a township and go north 6 sections or 6 miles, and then work west 6 1-mile sections and develop that 36 square mile area. Well, come to find out, this area had been primarily laid out previously, but our instructions by our contract was to subdivide it further into half and quarter sections for later settlers they were talking about. So we started out in the southeast corner, and tell you what, these chains are not very heavy the first week that you work with them, but after you've been out on the trail for a month or more, we were out at times 4 months at a time, dragging it through the plains, through the brush. This area we refer to as kind of not the tall grass that Barrett knew of from eastern or east of the Indian Meridian area, but we had short grass here. That dragging this chain, we had to make sure that we didn't get it caught on any bushes or rocks. And our compass man always kept us in a straight line. He would say, we're going to start at this point and you're going to that closest hill. Well, we had to tell him exactly how many chains it was to that hill. They would make the notes. It was 8 chains and a half to a mound of dirt. They recorded the type of grasses, the type of dirt. If we saw any trees, they recorded the size of the tree, the type of tree. And then, just to give you an example, sometimes we came to a pond of water. Oh, that was a learning experience because we were working in the fall of the year. Even though some of us needed a bath more or worse than others, we really didn't want to have to go wade across that pond. And we also ran into it when we got to rivers because we didn't know how deep it was. But our compass man had a system figured out that he could plot us to a point near the bank of that pond or river. and then he would plot a 90-degree angle to the outside of that pond, plot that point, give us another direction 90 degrees back north again to a place beyond the water bank, and come back over the same distance from that initial point, and we knew the distance across that pond. Then we had to figure out, measure the size of the body of water. Was it standing water? Was it a smooth flowing stream? Depending on the season of the year, some of them were a little stronger than others. But this is all in the notes that our head compass man had to take to fulfill the specifications of the contract that Mr. Barrett and Mr. Smith signed, because the General Land Office wanted to know exactly what was out in this area. Very few people had made notes of this area. There might have been quite a few people that have traveled through here. The Indians knew the land extremely well, but as far as what the government knew about it, they just knew of it as some area called the Great Plains.